it's always this moment. It doesn't, before it actually says you're live, you're actually live. And so the beginning of every video is me going, are we live yet? Yeah.
Luckily, no one's joined usually in the first 10 seconds, so it's okay.
Okay. Priscilla Lavoie, welcome to geNEOusChats. It's really nice to have you with us from sunny Barcelona. How are you doing this morning?
I'm
Or
good.
this
I wish it
afternoon?
was sunny. It's quite rainy here today, but I'm doing well. I'm doing well. I just came back from Krakow, Poland, and yeah, so I shouldn't actually complain about the weather here in Barcelona because it was quite cold in Poland. It snowed a little bit
Really?
on one of the days I was there.
Oh,
Yeah,
really? Yeah,
yeah.
it's that weird sort of weather. I mean, and conversely, up in Scotland, we had some really quite warm days, and like really, really warm for us, like 19 degrees. So everyone's
So
out
hot.
barbecuing and in t-shirts and shorts and stuff. And then 2 days later, we had snow, and
Wow.
it's been, yeah, it's that weird kind of year. But appreciate you making the time anyway. And it's you've got a really quite an interesting background. That one of the reasons we want to speak to you today is we've been thinking a lot about entrepreneurship, particularly in the context of, we know in among like people in education that we know, there's a lot of people right now kind of heading off and doing their own thing, leaving bigger companies. Teachers are leaving the classroom, as a result of the stress in the pandemic. Largely, a lot of that's happening. We hear an increasing amount of sort of teachers going into things like EdTech, but kind of starting their own things as well, which I never really saw on this scale before. And it's got me thinking about the sort of entrepreneurial pathway, not just from the people who come up through school and university and whatever, and then begin life that way, but the people who actually start it almost midway through their life or in mid to late stage career and just go, hey, I want to go and do this, and how does that work, and aren't we prepared for it? And so you've got the greatest background for this, because you are an entrepreneur. You've been involved in the sort of the investment side and incubators, and you've got a lot of experience within education as well. So you've got that kind of quite a rounded view of how things all fit together. So I just wanted to ask you, when you say in your bio that you're an entrepreneur, what does that mean to you? Does it mean the same to you that it always did? Do you think it means different things to different people? What is it about that word? Why would you use that?
Well, so Mark, first of all, thank you so much for having me here. I've always been on the other side of these Neo Talks as a spectator, as an audience member. So I'm flattered that I've been invited here today, and I appreciate it. I'm really excited to talk about this topic because, yeah, entrepreneurship is definitely something that's always been a part of me, and been something very interesting for me to discuss. So yeah, happy to share my thoughts here today. So when I think about the word entrepreneur, I guess the first association that pops up in my mind is a hustler, right? So maybe some people have a negative connotation when they hear the word hustler, but for me, it's really someone who relies on themselves, someone who uses their own grit to create something, to build something, oftentimes from nothing at all. So yeah, really someone who can pull a rabbit out of a hat. And thinking about my own experience, my parents were entrepreneurs. Neither of them had any kind of formal education, post high school. My mom was an immigrant who moved to Canada from Sri Lanka when she was 18. And yet they, through entrepreneurship, were able to build themselves up, build up their lives together. And I think watching that growing up was a huge eye-opener for me, that the let's say traditional way of going to school and finding a career and being at that same job for X number of years or decades, it doesn't necessarily have to be the way to go. And there are, yeah, other routes for people who feel that calling. And so, growing up with my parents, owning a hotel in Florida and a residence home in Montreal, dabbling in real estate ventures. I'm sure that really influenced me as a child and as an adult today. Thinking back when I was 10 years old in the 5th grade, I had my first entrepreneurial experience selling lollipops. I would buy lollipops in bulk, at Walmart or Costco, and then go back to school and sell them for €1 a pop or $1 a pop. I was in Florida, so it was $1.
$1? Wow, that's quite a margin.
Some good markup there. Yeah.
Right. So you've had this all around you. I mean, I like this because the when you talk about entrepreneurship, I mean, that's just it, isn't it? I mean, it can be just as simple as you see an opportunity, you see, okay, I could actually solve this problem of people, they're kind of they're at school, there's maybe nowhere to get X and Y, or the shop only opens on this time. So if I've got a bag full of lollipops, it's a seller's market, and there you go. And it can be as simple as that, isn't it? It's not, people might think it's about, you've designed an app or you started this kind of tech project or whatever, but it can be, we're probably all a lot more entrepreneurial than we think we are. There's probably, and even within our jobs as well, there's probably a lot of that kind of stuff goes on. So, I mean, your parents, what was it they did? You said they were both entrepreneurs. So you mentioned a hotel.
Yeah, so when I was 3 or 4 years old, we moved from Montreal, where I was born, down to Florida from one day to the next. It was just a very sudden thing. I was pulled out of school and or preschool or whatever it was, and my sister and I were told, hey, we're moving to the sunny place. And so we went to Florida, and my parents, they began by managing a hotel down there, and then they ended up buying the hotel and running that for almost 10 years. So I pretty much grew up around that, nights, evenings and weekends or summers when I wasn't in school, I was in the hotel watching them work every single day. So that really was a huge part of my upbringing, watching them be entrepreneurs in that role. And then when we moved back to Montreal, they reinvented themselves again. So this is when I was about 13. We left everything behind in Florida. They had sold the hotel, and we get to Florida, and they began a residence home together. And my mom ran the residence home for another 10 or 15 years. So yeah, just watching them start from nothing over and over again throughout their lives has been really a huge inspiration.
What do you think, sticking with your parents for a second, I mean, what do you think it was about them that propelled them along that pathway rather than the sort of, what some would probably say is the more stable pathway of taking a job, building a career within something where you've got that kind of regular paycheck? Because it definitely is. It definitely is a more stable life, isn't it? But what do you think it was about them that made them kind of eschew that option and say, this might be a more difficult path to walk for us, but this is what we're going to do?
Yeah, I think this is quite easy for me to explain because I'm so similar to them in these respects. So my dad gets bored very easily. Every year, every 2 years, he needs a big change in his life. And I'm very, very much on the same path where I need something fresh and exciting all the time. So I think entrepreneurship and being bored also go hand in hand. You want to try new things all the time. Yeah. I think the fact that they both don't have advanced or formal education, they don't have university degrees from fancy schools, also propelled them in this direction, because you don't have this traditional path already kind of laid out for you when you do graduate from a good school in a particular major. You kind of have to just create your own path, and that could mean trial and error, just starting things and seeing what works, and if not, hey, pivoting to something else. You kind of have yourself to fall back on. You don't have that degree, that major to fall back on, and these companies that you can apply to that have these specific roles that you could potentially fill. In their case, it was really about what they could make happen, that rabbit that they could pull out of their hat.
It's a curious thing, isn't it? It's like, necessity is the mother of invention and all that kind of stuff. That there is something about knowing there's no safety net under you that often, it's a real test of who you are. I mean, you find out a lot about yourself when your back's against the wall and you're like, I've got to pull a rabbit out of the hat, to use your expression. And I wonder, I mean, I don't, I'm not sure that everybody feels able to do it. But it's a curious thing about entrepreneurship that you've mentioned that they don't have the sort of typical path. And that's a lot of the entrepreneurs I know, they didn't really fit in with that traditional path, whether it could be, boredom, they were stimulated by constant novelty. They didn't want to, work for somebody and be told what to do is another thing that I find quite common. And a lot of them were kind of left aside in more sort of formal schooling and formal educational environments, where they're just like, I don't work here, I don't get this. I mean, for the entrepreneurs that and I'm going to include yourself in this, what do you think are some of the traits that stand out, or the experiences, the sort of formative experiences, the backgrounds, things that you find popping up again and again that you think, yeah, there's something here, there's something that binds people together in that sense?
Yeah, I definitely think what you're saying, this bit of rebellion in them, someone who doesn't maybe mesh well with authority or doesn't like doing what they're told, has something to do with it. Looking back at my own experience, I kind of had an awakening like that one day. I was working for a startup out of university. So this was probably 2 years post-university. And the startup I was working for got acquired. So after a year and a half of my time being spent there, we got acquired for $34 million. And it was a really exciting time. But then the startup became part of a much bigger, much wider organization with several thousands of employees suddenly. So I found myself working for a big corporation from one day to the next. And I realized, hey, wow, this is really not for me. And although, let's say, a startup is not necessarily being an entrepreneur, I would say it's quite close to it. So, you have your hands in so many different areas and wearing so many different hats. You're really responsible for so much more than you would be in a corporation with thousands and thousands of employees, where you're usually just doing, this one minute task or role. In a startup, yeah, you're hustling, right? So it has kind of that common trait of being an entrepreneur. And so after we were acquired, I realized I could never work for a corporation again. And I've really stuck to the startup and entrepreneurial world since. And I think part of that is, not being able to follow kind of the norm, the status quo of, employee-employer kind of relationships and having to do what you're told. So I would say, rebellion is definitely one of them. Going back to the first word that I associate entrepreneurship with is being a hustler, someone who can just can I curse on here? Can I say a bad word? Am I allowed?
Yeah.
So someone who can make shit happen, someone who can
go for it.
Roll up their sleeves, get a bit dirty sometimes. And that's something I do feel is lacking a bit these days, with maybe people who romanticize entrepreneurship a little bit. They see it in the movies and they have this idea that it's very easy to have an overnight success without putting in the really hard work that is very necessary. You have to work harder than ever as an entrepreneur, and you really you have to roll up those sleeves. And so that's something that is another huge important trait in entrepreneurs, is that they can really put in the work, because it is hard work at the end of the day.
Yeah, I fully agree with you that it's romanticized. I really do think so. And I don't think Hollywood helps. I mean, Hollywood generally doesn't help with very much, to be honest. It is romanticized. It's very exciting when you register your company name and set up your website and, have your first meetings and get your business plan and all of that kind of stuff. But then 2 months later, when the money's running out and it's almost done, and you're like, the thing that we thought was going to work is actually, it's not really what people need and we need to change, but are we ready? Or the people that I'm working with that were really nice to be friends with, suddenly under pressure and under the microscope turn out to be slightly different than I thought. There's all kinds of reality in there that is super hard to get through, that I don't think people really, they don't quite know. They know it's hard work, but the reality, you can't really explain it to somebody what it can be like. I wonder, you mentioned about with companies and stuff, with basically, entrepreneurs are often people that don't do well in those situations where there's a diktat and there's a kind of, you've got to follow this and you've got to do this and you don't have that freedom and flexibility. Do you think it's changing a little bit? I mean, there's a lot of companies, let's say companies rather than necessarily corporations, that are talking the talk about flat hierarchies, kind of project-based working. You're shifting around, your roles are more fluid. They're maybe even talking about trying at least to get cultures of innovation, and maybe even pockets of entrepreneurship within the companies, things like that. Do you think that, is that really enough for people? Somebody like yourself, somebody who's classes themselves as an entrepreneur. Do you think there's ever going to be that kind of culture within a company that can really make you feel like, yeah, this is enough? Can they ever get it right? Do you see success stories, or is it just kind of all talk?
Yeah, I think it really depends on the person and their own, let's say, spectrum of acceptable experiences. For me, I think running your own show, your own company is a completely different experience to working for someone else, as forward thinking as the company might be in terms of entrepreneurship. It's totally different when you're on your own and you're having to rely on yourself for financing and for your own food on the table. That's a totally different ball game, and a totally different level of excitement. As scary as it is, it's also very exciting on the other side when you make things come to life. So I would have to say that they're not quite the same, but it totally depends. For someone else, it might be enough and it might be the right fit as well. Some people's risk tolerance are not so high, and it all depends on your personal circumstances as well. I mean, if I had kids and let's say more obligations financially, then it would probably be a different story. I have a husband who I can rely on as well, who has his own salary that we can share. So it all depends on personal circumstances, and I don't judge anyone. I think it's everyone's own. They have to find their own way and their own place in the world. But for me personally, I think they're quite different experiences.
So how did you find your way then? I mean, let's just ask you a bit more about your kind of your experience within different aspects of entrepreneurship. So because you've been involved in the investing side, the incubator side, within startups, within, you've been through the business school environment, what's your pathway through all of this? What kind of different experiences and different dimensions have you been involved within in entrepreneurship?
Yeah, so besides that 10-year-old fifth grade lollipop selling experience, I've definitely had.
Well, that was the peak, right? I mean, it's been downhill since there. Yeah.
Exactly.
You'll never find a margin like that again, that's for sure. Yeah.
The good old days. No, but fast forward to even as early as my university days. It's been quite a while since then. But I was always drawn to entrepreneurship classes in university and those types of projects, even if they were optional, projects or optional classes. I was always jumping into those as often as I could. And I really couldn't stop dreaming up ideas that I wanted to implement. I think for me personally, timing is very important. So, right after university, it wasn't really the moment for me to dabble into entrepreneurship. And so I started in the startup world. And as I mentioned, the startup I was working for got acquired. And after we were acquired, I told you I had this experience of working in a corporation. It wasn't quite the fit for me. So I left after another year there and decided to do my MBA at IESE Business School here in Barcelona. And I think that's when my, let's say, spark for entrepreneurship got it reignited. So the program is very focused on entrepreneurship for those who want to focus on that area. And so the university has a lot of ties with great angel investors and VCs here in Barcelona. Now they have a really good entrepreneurial program that didn't exist while I was there, but it was let's say moving in that direction. So they had some summer programs that you could take part in, and really a great network in the entrepreneurship space within Barcelona and Spain, but also Europe and worldwide. And I did take part in a summer entrepreneurship experience there and kind of dabbled in a startup in the hospitality space. But again, timing wasn't right after an MBA that costs, 100,000 euros plus, if you count living expenses. Wasn't really the right time for me to start something else. So I needed a paying job, that was the reality of things. So yeah, timing wasn't right. So fast forward a few years later when it was, I was in Montreal at that time and saw a really great business model that was working quite well in the States. And I decided to try to implement it here in Spain. And so I was on a plane from one day to the next, from Montreal to Barcelona, kind of like my parents did from Montreal to Florida, very sudden kind of shift of life, and decided to launch this app here. And so I found a co-founder who was a CTO who built the app in iOS and Android. And we had this amazing app for over 3 years here in Barcelona, 10,000 users. We, raised financing. It was super exciting. And well, for various reasons, it didn't work out and we closed it down. And I'm kind of glad we did because it was in the hospitality space and well, COVID happened right afterwards. So I really do believe, everything happens for a reason. It was a great learning experience nonetheless. And after that, I went into managing director position at the startup incubator here in Barcelona as well. So it's an incubator that has several locations in Europe, and I was leading the team here at the Barcelona-based incubator. And that also was really interesting because it helped me stay in the entrepreneurship world, but not be an entrepreneur myself. So really helping other teams who had projects or wanted to start projects, and really stay more involved in the startup and entrepreneurial world, but from let's say a bird's eye view, a little bit of a distance, which is nice as well.
That's a pretty comprehensive experience. I mean, you've been in the thick of it, you've had sort of skin in the game as such, you've come through the sort of formal environment, but you've also experientially been in the sort of less structured environment and seeing your parents doing what they're doing. I mean, you've seen and been involved with all sides of it. So thinking about you now, a friend coming to you or a colleague coming to you and saying, I'm thinking about doing my own thing, and they're coming to you for advice, what kind of stuff are you sitting down and talking to them about? What kind of stuff are you telling them about this? Imagine they've never done it before, because this is happening a lot right now. There's people seeing opportunities, especially digitally, a wide open world. What's that conversation like?
Yeah, I'm often the cheerleader for friends and family members who want to start something. I think that's one of the first things you do as a new entrepreneur is you turn to someone who's done it before and you ask for advice. And so a lot of people come to me, and I guess my main message is go for it. I definitely want people to try it out, see what it's like for themselves. I think the best experience is always firsthand, and you never know until you try it. So there's another question I like to ask is, when they're nervous or doubtful, and maybe, just a bit skeptical that they should move forward, I ask, what's the worst that can happen? And I think that's a really important question that we have to ask ourselves at these moments, these inflection points in our lives when, we have a tough or difficult road in front of us where we're deciding, whether we should do something or not, is what's the worst that can happen? And usually when you think about it, it's not that bad. We usually have, I think most of us are lucky to have something to fall back on. Worst case, that can support us through, the downs, if there are downs, and there will be. And so, yeah, I like to be their cheerleader. I also provide them with a lot of, let's say, tools and resources. So, I mean, I think one of the great things about being an entrepreneur in 2022 is there are so many amazing resources available on the internet, in your own city, where, for example, you have what we were talking about incubators earlier, incubators who can help you even find a team or an idea. You have accelerators that can help bring your idea or your project to life. There are tons of angel investors and VCs around these days, and there are platforms and directories like AngelList, angel.co to help you find these people. You have free or cheap tools like Canva for design, Unsplash for stock photos. You have things like HubSpot that have a free CRM to manage your contacts. So there are so many amazing resources. I could go on and on. But of course, this accessibility to these resources and support also means that you have a lot more people vying for that same spot, right? That same success. So of course, you have more competition for your same audience. So it's all about finding your competitive advantage. And I would say that's the other piece of advice I always give is find your competitive advantage, find what your position is in the market. What gap are you trying to fill that other players are not filling? I think that's a really, really important question to answer as early as possible. And finding that product market fit is really the key to success, I think, for most entrepreneurs.
Yeah, it seems like it's, as you say, there's a whole lot of opportunity, but of course you're not the only hunter in the woods, and at a global level you're always going to find a lot of competition. I sometimes wonder if it's kind of getting a bit more local again, where you're able to, because nobody knows your community better than you, and there's more local opportunities perhaps because you've, for example, been out, traveled, had conversations with interesting people, and you're starting to look at your environment with fresh eyes and you see opportunities that way. And it seems like a lot of that's happening. And when I think back about things that stand out for me in my experiences in startups and being an entrepreneur, I guess I've never really used that word about myself, but I suppose I am. The two things that stand out were, for example, really getting to know the people you're working with, before you get in, before you get into the fire, and the doubts you have about sort of a business model or how things are being done. Never say, oh, we'll figure that out later. Like, get it out now, because those doubts become kind of chasms, and it's very difficult under pressure to resolve those things. And also not personalizing your idea as well. I find that, one thing I've seen is that people have such a passion for their idea, but they can't quite always separate the details from the vision. So like, yes, you've got this vision and stick to it, but don't get precious about the details. If the market says we're not really into this, we prefer it was like that, it's not personal. Don't get, too invested in that. Just be prepared to react and change. And I see a lot of people almost just hanging on to the ship as it goes down. I've definitely seen that before. In your experience, what have been the things that have really sunk a venture, a project? What are the things that really stand out to you and you're like, oh, there it is again?
Yeah, I mean, everything that you're saying rings a bell. So I've definitely encountered all of those in my own experiences, and then in the experiences of the startups that were part of my incubator, for example. In my own startup experience, we definitely had co-founder issues, and it was the main reason why the startup ended at the end. So I've never actually told this story publicly yet. I'm not sure how in detail I'll go. since this is all over social media now. And my ex-co-founder is probably watching or going to watch this at some point. Hi. But yeah, we were 3 years in, more or less, and we got the okay from our investors that they would reinvest. So we would have another 6-month runway to basically test out some new things that we had just implemented. So, like you mentioned, pivoting. So we pivoted to kind of another direction. And we needed some time to basically test out this pivot. And so we got the okay from the investors, and I'm in celebration mode. And then a few hours later, my co-founder basically writes me, not even calls me or meets me in person, writes me that he doesn't have the energy to move on anymore, to continue with the project. So obviously that was a huge shock, especially after we just received this go ahead from the investors. So I obviously had to tell the investors, hold on, don't send the money. We have a little bit of an issue. My co-founder is leaving. And the funding round basically collapsed because of that. It didn't make sense for the investors to send the cash anymore now that one of the two co-founders was not going to be with the project anymore. And so having those early conversations with co-founders, really understanding how long are they in this for, are they, it's like a marriage. Are you in this for better, for worse, till death do us part, or is this, a fun fling that you want to have for a couple of years and that's it? Really having those tough, open conversations as early as possible is crucial. Although I would say as a caveat that it's easier said than done. So when I moved to Barcelona to start that project, I searched for a month and a half for a CTO co-founder. And maybe that doesn't seem like a lot of time for many people, because many people are shocked that I was able to find a great CTO co-founder in that amount of time. But in the lifetime of a startup, that's a lot to be searching. So I was just really happy to find someone who wanted to get on board. And, even if he said, hey, I'm not sure I'll be in this for more than 2 years, I'm not sure I would have said no or not moved ahead with him anyway. So I think much easier said than done. Sometimes the situation just happens to be what it is, and you have to move forward just to start getting traction. Co-founder issues. And I must say also, if he's out there, he's a great person, a great co-founder, and I have no remorse for what happened. And looking back, it was really a blessing in disguise. Like I said, COVID happened. So I think it was really great that life panned out how it did. Thank you. Co-founder issues. I would say your own personal financial runway. So how long can you go, without making a salary, I think is another huge roadblock for entrepreneurs and teams. And sometimes that, going back to co-founder issues, having that conversation about, personal financial situations as early as possible really is important. We had a lot of teams at the incubator fall apart because of that, because the project, instead of a 6-month to initial raise, it took 9 months or 12 months, and the entrepreneur just couldn't do it anymore. So having those real conversations about financial situations is important as well. And expectations around work-life balance. I mean, there are so many things that can go on and on, but I think all of these points need to be discussed with the team first and foremost. I think, it all comes down to that, just having the expectations communicated and have everyone be aligned on those, I think is crucial.
Probably conversations at home as well, isn't it? Because it impacts your personal life hugely as well. And obviously financially as well. Not just the work-life balance, but financially, as you say. That's the other thing that I have seen as well, is the sort of, you need to be really comfortable with bootstrapping. If you're not able to do that really in your own life, personally, you're going to find it really difficult in a startup, I think. And I've been involved with a startup where I was outvoted on the decision at the beginning to register us all as like employees of the company with a fixed salary. from the beginning, rather than as freelancers who just kind of took a bit out when it was going okay, which is what I would have preferred, even though it was the much harder path. And it was those salaries coming out that just about sank the company in 6 months. Managed to just get by. It was like that curve where the new business is taking off and everything's running out, and you're just like, where's it going to cross over? If it crosses over just here, we're going to survive. If it crosses over here, we're dead. And it was by a matter of weeks, we actually managed to survive. And I still see that kind of thing happening. People thinking initially about how much am I going to make, or what am I going to be able to take it out? And it's like, that's such a long way off, and you see these businesses where they're like, yeah, I'm just working from my parents' garage. And I'm like, yeah, that's probably a good idea, to keep costs as absolutely low as you can, and that's the problem with the romanticized image is, for a little while, I mean, it's going to be tough. You mentioned the word grit earlier on, which is kind of interesting. I'm thinking about the people that kind of are able to do this, so there's endless books about it, endless TED Talks, endless, what is, the typology of the entrepreneur? Is it creativity? Is it this? Is it that? Is it innate? Is it learned? Blah, blah, blah. What do you think is going on with people that are coming up today, like younger people? Do you see more of a gravitation towards entrepreneurship than sort of years ago? People, instead of going directly into companies or even directly into university, they're kind of going more to do their own thing. And what do you think's happening? Is there anything happening in education that's actually helping learners prepare a bit more for that kind of world? Or are we still getting it wrong? Are entrepreneurs still succeeding in spite of and not because of their education?
Yeah, I definitely think there's been an improvement in, let's say, entrepreneurial support within the education system. There's a spectrum of that, of course. You have some schools who are, really doing amazing things, and then others who are really doing the bare minimum. But I would say they have evolved, especially since I've been in school. There are now classes and projects, even incubators and accelerators within a lot of schools, even high schools, and sometimes even elementary schools. I would say most probably still have a long way to go to really support learners in their entrepreneurial dreams. And I think a big part of that is recognizing that every learner, every kid, every teen is unique and has different goals. So perhaps the standardized approach that a lot of schools have is not the way to go for everyone. And that's why I am so fond of Learn Life, who I'm with right now, by the way. Our learning programs are really personal and really support learners in their specific passions. And I would say the environment itself even breeds creativity, and learners are inspired to be and guided to be self-determined and self-directed. So I would say, what's more entrepreneurial than that? You have to be self-determined and self-directed in entrepreneurship. So I would say schools who are moving down this more self-determined path and are really supporting learners with their passions on a more personal level, they can really support learners in their entrepreneurial dreams. But those schools who are more, I would say, on a standardized route, perhaps they have some room to grow when it comes to supporting with entrepreneurship, and they should. I mean, we're in 2022, and the world has changed quite a bit, in the last decades. And there are definitely more and more people interested in entrepreneurship, in whatever sense of the word that means. We talked about hotel or residence home, when we also talked about big startups and even entrepreneurship. It can be any of these, but really understanding what the person is looking for and what path they want to take, and being able to nurture them in that direction I think is the goal of schools today.
Yes, and I think it's interesting. I mean, the word incubator, it's almost like schools that are getting it right are, in a broader sense, they're sort of the system itself can be an incubator because you're providing this safe space to fail, if you want to use that word, to find out about yourself, to reflect on yourself, to, without the kind of consequences that go with that if you're doing that in a startup, with all this funding behind you, and you don't always have the space to make too many mistakes, before your luck runs out. So it's nice. It would be nice to sort of see people having that space to, as you say, find their own passions, figure out what they're about, what makes them tick, how they bounce back, when something doesn't go their way, and really have that space to reflect. So when they step out of that, they're like, they know themselves. They're not discovering who they are when they're in their 40s and stuff, So that's really important. And actually, I was thinking about when I was last in Learn Life in Barcelona. I'd been in there for about 10 minutes, and one of the learners came up and sold me a dessert. So quite entrepreneurial. It was really good, actually. But I think there was a good margin on it as well, actually.
Yeah, and that's a perfect example, that project. So they baked goods, and they were tasked with selling them for a profit at a market, and that involves so many things. It involves cost management, and involves inventory, because you want to be left over with a ton of flour afterwards. It involves marketing, it involves sales, there are finances. There are so many things that were involved in that one project that really help the learners understand what entrepreneurship is all about, because it really is about all of those things and putting them all together. Yeah, absolutely.
It's such a great opportunity because it's exciting, it's engaging, it's learner directed, and underneath the things you've mentioned, the kind of marketing, the budgeting and everything, there's core skills of literacy and numeracy and all the stuff you want to kind of make sure is involved in an educational approach. It's all in there, but you don't have to present it in this dry way. I mean, one project by, baking cakes and selling at a market can involve so much learning. And it's really intoxicating to see the opportunities that people have nowadays with digital spaces. So if they are in a studio making stuff and tinkering, and they find out, hey, I can make this thing pretty well, and my classmates like it, and maybe visitors to the school like it, there might be something in this, and they can just open a thing on Etsy or whatever, and it's there, it's done. They've got that outlet now, digitally, where they can actually test the validity of their ideas without really very much red tape. Wherever you are in the world, it's actually quite an intoxicating time. Whereas, it wasn't like that when I was a kid, and I was kind of like you, actually. I probably have given you a run for your money. I had a little shop in my my garden shed. And it's actually quite embarrassing to think about this, actually. I'm saying this out loud, but I used to rent out comic books.
Oh, wow.
And actually rent out badminton rackets and stuff like that. So the park outside my house was full of kids like reading my comics and stuff, and I would rent it by the hour. And actually remember like buying like a friend's bike and saying, hey, I'll give you like £1 an hour or something to borrow your bike, and then renting out for 150 sort of thing. I must have been like 9 years old. It's just, it's really funny to think about, but that's it. It's not about, it's not necessarily business. It's just creativity. It's just, what can I do? What works, what doesn't. It's fun, above and beyond anything else, regardless of how seriously you take it or how much of a business you want to make of things. So there's nothing to lose from including that kind of stuff in education and making it central.
Exactly. And letting learners know that, like you said, that you can bounce back. A failure is not necessarily the end of the world. It can be, something that is just a trial, and you see how it goes and you learn from it. And then, you come back next time and try something a little bit different, and that's okay. I think that's, a nice direction. I would say that the more innovative schools are moving in is this moving away from failure, or that you have to succeed. It's okay to try things. And I think that's a message that we need to send to our future generations every day, that, they can have fun and try things, and it's okay.
Yeah, there's a great initiative. I don't know if it made it across Spain, but it was the hashtag was no wrong path, and it was shared very widely in the UK anyway. I saw it a lot here where you would take a picture of your the career path you'd followed, and it's far from the 30 years ago where you would go through formal education and then work in a bank and stay at the same company for 30 years, of course. So you've got these people displaying this weird and wonderful meandering path through different things to get to something that was totally unrelated to where they started. And just and the idea was, making it clear there's no wrong path. There's nothing wrong with experimenting and trying out and saying, oh, that's not for me. It's all learning. It's like you said right at the start, what's the worst that can happen? You find out so much about yourself. And so getting away from this idea of success, as a very, very narrow view of what it is. And on that note, I'd like to ask you just as a sort of final question, what's next for you? Because I know you're kind of you've obviously got many things you're involved in right now. What do the next few years look like? Do you have a sort of clear idea, or are you sort of looking out for something? What are you thinking? What's ahead?
Yeah, definitely in a bit of a transitionary phase right now. So I am going to be closing up my journey with Learn Life in the next couple of months. So it's been really, really wonderful. But I do have this entrepreneurial itch that keeps it keeps itching away. So I need to get back to that. It is my calling. If I think back to my 10-year-old self selling lollipops and what my dreams were in that moment, and what
Yeah.
my gut instinct tells me is that yeah, I'm an entrepreneur at heart. I always will be. And yeah, so I do want to tap back into that, and I feel like I'm ready. It's the right moment for me again. And so I'll be slowly transitioning into that. And I have quite a few ideas. I don't know if I should bore you with them right now,
Well, if
but I
you're
have
able to share them without giving away a competitive advantage, I'm just going to take some notes. Hang on, because I'm looking for some ideas too. No, I'm kidding. I'm kidding. But if you're okay to
yeah, a
share them, we'd
few.
love to hear what you're thinking about.
Oh wow, I have so many. Definitely too many. I need to narrow it down to
Yeah.
two or three to test. I do have a different view on what I want to do entrepreneurship wise this time around than last time. So last time it was all about let's say high growth, well funded rocket ship kind of startup that I wanted to build. Together with the team, and I wanted to scale, and I guess kind of the more glamorized view of entrepreneurship. If you
Yeah.
ask any 20-year-old what they want to do as an entrepreneur, it's probably that. This time around, I guess I want to take more of a freelancer view on things. So I have a few e-commerce shop ideas that I want to get up, always with an impact component, or at least bringing good to the world in some way. So ideas around sleep. I have some passion projects I also want to launch in the hospitality space. So it's I guess because of my parents owning this hotel, and my startup being in the hospitality space here previously in Barcelona, I've always been attracted to this world. And I have some things that I want to launch there on, let's say, a more fun project level, more than anything that's going to create a huge amount of revenue. But I think it's
Yeah.
also
Yeah.
really important that you do things that are meaningful and fun to you.
Yeah.
I mean, I a ton of things. I'm gonna put some things out there in the next couple of months and see what sticks, and see what direction I want to go down after that.
It sounds like the product of a different version of yourself that's evolved from where you were like 10 years ago, for example, and and prioritizing fun and passion projects, and there seems to be diversity of ideas as well, that although you're narrowing it down, I get the feeling there's going to be two or three plates spinning in the air at the same time from what you're saying. um, which is great. And that's the other thing as well, is it doesn't have to be one thing, does it? You can get involved in different things and try them out and then decide which one to focus on. And it's fun, it's creative, and you get to bring all that experience and all that life experience to bear. And I can't wait to see what you do. Actually, I can't wait to see these announcements and see what's coming next for you. Really looking forward to it.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Yeah, I'm really excited myself.
Well, thank you for sharing your insights, your experience, your stories with us, especially kind of, candidly as well about getting away from the glamorized idea of what this pathway is like. Because I think that, again, that's super important for people to get comfortable with. So really appreciate your time. It's been great talking to you, Priscilla. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Mark. This has been wonderful.
Okay, take care now, and I'll look forward to following your journey on LinkedIn and see what comes next for you.
All right, we'll talk soon.
Okay.
Take care.
All right, take care now.
Bye.
Bye-bye.